You step quietly into the early hours of December 7th, 1941, a morning that should have been ordinary, a morning shaped by routine, a morning that held nothing more dramatic than the rising sun over Pearl Harbor. The air is warm. The water is calm. Ships rest at anchor as though the world is at peace. Sailors move through the base at an easy pace, thinking of breakfast, letters from home, and the small concerns of another day far from the mainland. And in the calm before history turns, you find the man whose story you are about to follow. Before you drift off, take a moment to subscribe, but only if stories told in whispers feel like a place you want to return to, and tell us where you're listening from, or which image stays with you. Welcome to Echoes of War, a place where courage rises from quiet places, and where ordinary men find themselves standing inside extraordinary moments. Dorie Miller walks across the deck of the USS West Virginia with the quiet confidence of someone who grew up working hard and never expected life to make room for him. He is strong from years on farms and ranches. He carries himself with a natural steadiness. He is a steward in the segregated Navy, assigned to serve meals and clean cabins, the limits of his rating set by rules he did not choose. To the officers he serves, he is Miller. To his friends, he is Dorie. To history, he will become something else entirely. But on this morning, that transformation still sleeps beneath the surface. The ship hums softly beneath his feet. The harbor reflects the pale glow of dawn. Men speak in low voices as they prepare for another day of routine tasks. Nothing suggests the violence that is minutes away. Nothing warns them of the fire that is already roaring toward this peaceful bay. You stand with him in these last moments of calm, moments that will soon feel impossibly distant. He pauses near the rail and glances across the water, unaware that aircraft are already rising over the horizon, unaware that torpedoes are being armed, unaware that his life, and the lives of thousands around him, are about to be split into a before and an after. He cannot sense the danger that races toward him. He cannot know that in less than an hour, flames will engulf the decks around him. He cannot imagine that he will soon be carrying the wounded toward safety, or that he will take hold of a gun he was never trained to fire. He cannot know that the world will one day speak his name with reverence. Right now, he is just a young man doing his job, a man beginning another day of service in a navy that does not yet see what he is capable of. And you, standing just behind the story, watch the scene quietly, knowing what he does not. The sun rises a little higher. The harbor glows with that soft, familiar warmth. And then, with no warning at all, the first shadows fall across the water. Within minutes, the sky will tear open. Within minutes, decisions will be forced upon men who are not ready for them. Within minutes, ordinary sailors will face the kind of terror that strips life down to instinct and courage. And within those same minutes, Dorie Miller will step forward in a way no one could have predicted, not because he was trained, not because he was equipped, but because something inside him refuses to step back when others need him. Before the fire begins, before the smoke rises, before history turns its gaze toward him, you take one last breath in this brief, fragile calm. And as you drift into the story, a quiet voice follows you, soft, steady, meant only to guide you gently into what comes next. The routine that held the morning together. Before the attack, life aboard the USS West Virginia followed a rhythm so familiar that most sailors could move through it half asleep. You drift through that early light now, watching the ship breathe in its quiet routines. The sun has only begun to climb. Light spreads slowly across the harbor, warming the steel decks and casting long reflections on the still water. Sailors walk across the battleship with the unhurried confidence of men who believe they know the shape of the day ahead. Their thoughts are ordinary. Mail from home. Breakfast in the mess. Another round of drills. Another morning of duties repeated 100 times before. And in the middle of this steady routine moves Dorie Miller, beginning his day the same way he always does. He carries linens from one compartment to another, his footsteps sure and even. His hands are large and strong from years working on farms in Texas. His movements are efficient, practiced, thoughtful, shaped by a life that taught him to work without complaint and to take pride in whatever responsibility he was given. The Navy keeps him in the steward's branch, far from gunnery training or technical roles. It is all the segregation of the era allows. Cooking, cleaning, serving, tasks performed without recognition, without expectation that his abilities reach beyond them. But you can feel something else beneath his calm exterior. A quiet readiness. A strong, steady presence that has nothing to do with rank and everything to do with character. He greets a few sailors as he moves along the passageway. Some nod politely. Some barely look up. Others smile and exchange a quick word. For many on board, Dorie is a familiar sight, the dependable man who never seems hurried, never seems shaken, never raises his voice. As he steps onto the deck, the harbor stretches out before him in gentle colors, soft blues, warm golds, and the faint haze of early morning heat. He leans on the railing for a moment, letting the breeze touch his face, unaware that these are the last seconds of peace he will ever know on this ship. Nothing in his world hints at danger. Nothing warns him that within minutes the sky will fill with shapes no one expects. Nothing prepares him for the moment when instinct, not training, will decide who lives and who does not. You stand just behind him, silent in your place as the observer. You can feel how close the turning point is, how the quiet of this morning is stretched thin, almost fragile, waiting for the first tear to appear. He looks across the harbor one last time, thinking only of the day ahead, not the history that is about to crash into it. And in this moment, before the fire and the noise, you understand something that he cannot yet sense. When the world begins to fall apart, the man who was never trained for combat. The sky changes before anyone notices. The morning still feels ordinary when you follow Dorie below deck. The air carries the familiar scent of breakfast cooking, coffee, bread, a hint of bacon drifting through narrow passageways. Men speak in low voices as they prepare for the day, their conversations echoing softly against steel walls. Everything feels predictable. Everything feels steady. Everything feels safe. Dorie works with the calm focus that defines him. He arranges trays, wipes down counters, checks that everything in the pantry is in order before the officers arrive. These are tasks he has performed countless times, the quiet routines of a navy that expects its stewards to stay in the background. But there is a steadiness in him that goes beyond habit. It is the same steadiness that carried him through long days on cattle ranches, through storms on the Great Plains, through the challenges of growing up in a world determined to limit who he could become. In another passageway, someone laughs at a joke. A few sailors argue about baseball scores. A radio crackles with faint music from a nearby room. Life aboard the ship moves with its usual rhythm. Then something shifts, small at first, almost imperceptible. A distant thud. A faint vibration in the steel beneath their feet. A pause in conversation, as if a few men sense something is off but can't yet explain why. Dorie lifts his head. Another sound follows, sharper, closer, a noise that does not fit the routine of an easy Sunday morning. It rolls through the corridor like a question no one is ready to answer. A sailor near him frowns. "Did you hear that?" But before anyone can respond, the ship shudders again, not violently yet, but with enough force to make men stop what they're doing and look toward the nearest bulkhead. The air changes. The mood changes. The sense of safety changes. Somewhere above them, raised voices fill the passageway. Footsteps accelerate. A klaxon begins to wail, the kind of alarm that no one aboard ever wants to hear, the kind reserved for emergencies they've only trained for. And in that instant, the fragile calm of the morning snaps. Dorie reacts without hesitation. He sets down the tray in his hands, wipes his palms once on his apron, and turns toward the ladder leading upward. His body moves before thought catches up, guided by instinct, urgency, and a sense that whatever is happening above deck demands more than routine. You follow him as he climbs. The alarm grows louder. Shouts echo down the passageways. Something heavy slams onto the deck above, sending a tremor through the entire ship. He emerges into a scene that doesn't make sense at first. Smoke. Shouting. Men running toward stations. The distant drone of engines, not American engines, but the unmistakable roar of aircraft diving low over the harbor. And then he sees it. The first column of smoke rising from Battleship Row, dark and violent against the morning light. The attack has begun. All the quiet moments leading to this point. The breakfast routines, the calm reflections at the rail, the easy conversations below deck, shatter in an instant. Dorie stands at the threshold between ordinary life and the firestorm that is about to define him, and you feel the weight of that shift settle over everything. Nothing about this day will ever return to normal. Nothing about this moment will be forgotten. Nothing about the man standing here will remain the same. The first minutes of fire. When Dorie reaches the deck, the world he knew only minutes earlier has vanished. The calm harbor is gone. The morning sunlight is swallowed by smoke, and the steady rhythm of Navy life is replaced by chaos so sudden and violent that it feels unreal for a moment, like a nightmare he hasn't yet adjusted to. You follow him as he steps into the open. The air vibrates with the roar of engines overhead. Planes sweep low, close enough that the markings on their wings flash clear in the smoke-filtered light, the red circle of the rising sun. Men are shouting, pointing, scrambling toward their stations, their voices lost beneath the scream of diving aircraft. The first explosions hit with staggering force. Shock waves roll across the deck, knocking sailors off their feet. Shrapnel clatters against metal. Flames erupt along the water where torpedoes strike other ships in Battleship Row. Columns of black smoke twist upward into the dawn like dark towers rising from the sea. Dorie does not freeze. He does not hesitate. He moves toward danger with the same instinct that guided every decision of his life. Steady, decisive, shaped by responsibility rather than fear. A nearby explosion sends a burst of hot air across the deck. He shields his face for a moment, then looks around, assessing the situation. Men are already injured. Some lie on the deck, stunned. Others struggle to find cover or help friends who can't stand. Dorie reacts the way he always does. Not with panic, but with purpose. He rushes to the first wounded sailor he sees, a man bleeding from a deep cut along his leg, too shocked to move. Dorie lifts him with ease, carrying him toward a safer position behind a steel barrier. He sets him down gently, then turns without waiting for thanks. The explosions continue. More planes dive. More torpedoes streak through the water. The West Virginia shudders violently as a torpedo slams into her port side. The deck tilts. Men yell for help as compartments begin to flood. Dorie doesn't stop. He moves toward another sailor, this one unconscious, and drags him clear of falling debris. Then another, and another. His strength becomes a lifeline. His presence becomes a stabilizing force amid the chaos. Around him, the attack unfolds with terrifying speed. Bombs fall like burning hammers. The nearby Arizona erupts in a fireball that shakes the entire harbor, a flash so bright and violent that for a moment it looks like the sun itself has exploded. Debris rains down across the water. Sailors shout in disbelief as the shock wave ripples outward. Through it all, Dorie keeps moving. He hears the alarm for battle stations, but the steward's branch has no assigned combat role. No gun to man. No command post. No place in the Navy's structure for him to stand and fight. But the ship needs hands, not rules. And instinct tells him that the only way through this chaos is forward. You follow him as another explosion rocks the West Virginia, sending a rush of smoke across the deck. He wipes his eyes with the back of his forearm, coughing through the haze, searching for the next man who needs help. This is the first wave of the attack. The moment when shock gives way to survival. The moment when ordinary routines disappear and men have to confront what they're made of. And even though he doesn't know it yet, these first minutes are already shaping the legacy he never asked for. In the middle of fire, noise, and confusion, Dorie Miller is becoming the kind of man history remembers, not because he sought heroism, but because he stepped forward when there was no one else to do it. Instinct takes over. The attack deepens with each passing second. What began as confusion is now a coordinated strike designed to overwhelm every ship in the harbor. Explosions echo from all directions. The air grows thick with smoke, heat, and the metallic tang of burning steel. Dorie keeps moving, driven by instinct and urgency. He helps a sailor whose arm is bleeding heavily, guiding him toward a medic rushing in the opposite direction. Then he kneels beside another man struggling to breathe after the blast knocked him against a bulkhead. Dorie lifts him carefully, carrying him toward cover even as the deck vibrates beneath his feet. Every few steps, he looks up, not in fear, but in awareness, watching for falling debris, searching for the next man who needs help. He has become a quiet force in the middle of chaos, someone whose steadiness gives others the strength to keep moving. More torpedoes strike the West Virginia. The ship lists further. Men brace themselves against railings as the floor tilts beneath them. Water rushes into compartments below, and damage control teams shout orders over the noise, trying to slow the flooding. The sky is a blur of motion. Japanese aircraft dive in sharp arcs, engines roaring, guns flashing. You can see the pilots through the cockpit glass as they bank and loop, their silhouettes flickering through the smoke as they choose new targets. A burst of machine gun fire rakes across the deck, sparks dancing off the metal. Dorie ducks low, shielding a wounded sailor with his own body until the plane passes overhead. When the noise fades, he pulls the man to his feet and urges him towards safer ground. His world narrows into a set of simple truths. Help whoever you can. Move toward danger, not away from it. Do not stop. He doesn't think of rank or permission. He doesn't think of what the Navy expects of him. He thinks only of survival, not his own, but the men around him. A petty officer shouts for help near the port side, struggling to drag a heavy hose across the deck. Without hesitation, Dorie runs to him, adding his strength to the effort. Together they pull it toward a growing fire, trying to slow the flames before they spread. The heat forces them back, but the hose blast knocks down enough fire for others to pass through. More explosions shake the ship. More smoke fills the air. More cries rise over the roar of aircraft. Through it all, Dorie becomes a moving anchor, a presence others depend on even if they don't have time to thank him, a man who fills the gaps left by chaos. He is sweating, breathing hard, soot settling across his forehead and hands. His muscles ache from lifting bodies and dragging hoses. But he keeps going, each step guided by the instinct that has shaped his entire life. When someone needs help, you help. A sailor collapses beside him, disoriented and coughing. Dorie kneels, offering a steady hand, helping him back to his feet. He speaks few words. The noise is too loud for conversation, but the reassurance in his presence is unmistakable. And then, through the haze, through the fire, through the chaotic blur of the attack, you begin to see the shape of what he is becoming. He is no longer just a steward. He is no longer a figure working quietly in the background of the ship. He is becoming the calm in the storm, a man stepping into a role nobody trained him for, but everyone desperately needs. These are the minutes before the moment that will define his story. The moments when instinct, strength, and courage begin to align into something extraordinary. And soon, as the attack reaches its most violent point, Dorie Miller will step toward a weapon he has never been taught to use. And the course of history will tilt with him. The threshold of a decision. The attack intensifies until every sense feels overwhelmed. You follow Dorie through smoke and fire as he rises from below deck once again, searching for anyone he can help. His uniform is smeared with soot. His arms ache from lifting injured men. His breath comes fast, but his focus stays sharp. The West Virginia shudders violently under another torpedo strike. Alarms wail. Voices shout in every direction. Flames push through vents and open hatches. The deck beneath him tilts a little more with each passing minute. Even in this chaos, Dorie moves with purpose. He steadies men who stumble on the slanted steel. He grabs the arm of a sailor frozen in panic and urges him toward safety. He scans the deck constantly, looking for the next person who needs help. Then he sees something that makes him stop, just for a breath, long enough for instinct to sharpen into clarity. Near the port side, an anti-aircraft gun sits unmanned. Its crew is down, injured, thrown clear, or lying motionless on the deck. The weapon is ready, aimed toward a sky filled with enemy aircraft, but no one is there to fire it. Beside the gun, a petty officer staggers forward. His face is streaked with sweat and smoke. He looks at the weapon, then at Dorie, desperation sharpening his voice. "We need someone at that gun." It is not an order. It is the plea of a man who knows they are seconds from being defenseless. For a moment, Dorie stands between two worlds. Behind him lies the familiar, the work he knows, the tasks the Navy assigned him, the expectations that kept him far from weapons training or combat roles. Ahead of him lies something he has never been allowed to do: fight back. He does not have the luxury of hesitation. Another plane dives low, its guns flashing, bullets striking the deck in a spray of sparks. Men take cover. The petty officer flinches, but shouts again. "Can you fire that thing?" Dorie glances at the gun. Its handles are within reach. The trigger is simple. The need is immediate. He does not think of what the Navy forbids. He does not think of what he has never been taught. He does not think of the lines he is expected not to cross. He thinks of the men around him, the wounded he carried, the ship listing beneath his feet, the attack tearing through Battleship Row. And without a word, he moves toward the gun. The petty officer stares at him, stunned by the calm resolve in his expression. "You know how to use it?" the officer asks again, but the question is hollow now, spoken more from disbelief than doubt. Dorie gives a quiet answer that is as steady as his step. "I'll try." That simple sentence becomes the bridge between who he was and who the world will remember. He positions himself behind the Browning .50 caliber machine gun. The metal is hot beneath his hands. Smoke curls around him, stinging his eyes. The deck tilts beneath his boots as the ship continues to take on water. He has never been trained, but he is ready. He grips the handles, lifting his gaze toward the sky filled with shrieking aircraft. You stand just behind him, feeling the weight of this moment, the second before instinct becomes action, before an untrained steward becomes the defender of a sinking ship, before courage steps out from the quiet places of a man's life and reveals itself in full. The next breath will change everything, and Dorie Miller is already stepping into it. The moment he fires back. Dorie settles behind the Browning .50 caliber gun with a steadiness that surprises even the men watching him. The weapon is heavy, solid, alive with a potential for recoil he has never felt before. Smoke drifts across his face. The heat from nearby fires presses against his skin. Flames and debris flicker in his peripheral vision. The first enemy plane dives toward the harbor, its engines screaming through the thick air. He tracks its movement without hesitation. His hands grip the handles. His jaw tightens. Then he squeezes the trigger. The gun erupts in a thunderous burst that shakes through his shoulders. The recoil slams into him, but he holds firm, feet planted wide, back straight, arms absorbing the force with a strength built long before he ever stepped on a Navy ship. Tracer rounds streak upward in bright arcs, cutting through smoke and haze. The sky, moments ago filled only with incoming fire, now carries the sharp, rhythmic roar of the Browning answering back. The attacking aircraft jolts, forced into a sharper climb than intended. Whether Dorie's rounds hit or forced it off course hardly matters in this instant. What matters is that the ship is no longer silent. He adjusts his aim and fires again, and again. Each controlled burst pushes enemy planes away from the West Virginia's burning hull. Men around him shout encouragement, not commands, not instructions, just raw awe at what they're seeing. A steward, a man never trained, never permitted to touch a weapon like this, is standing firm behind one of the ship's guns, fighting like he has done it his entire life. Another plane dives low, guns blazing. Bullets tear across the deck. Dorie swings the Browning smoothly, firing short, precise bursts that chase the aircraft away. Spent shell casings rain to the floor around his boots, clattering across the slanted steel. Smoke thickens. Heat intensifies. The ship groans under the weight of flooding compartments. Still he keeps firing. More planes appear. Bombers, fighters, silhouettes cutting through the rising smoke. Some release their payloads in rushed attempts to avoid his gunfire. Some peel away at the last moment. Some take their chances and dive straight toward the ships in the harbor. Every time he sees one, he steadies himself and fires. Every burst feels like resistance carved out of chaos. Every shot becomes a way of saying, "Not without a fight." Sailors nearby glance at him repeatedly, not just because he is fighting, but because he is doing it with a calm focus that defies the terror surrounding them. For these men, in this moment, Dorie becomes a point of strength they can rally around. He continues firing until smoke nearly blinds him. He pauses only to wipe his eyes with the back of one hand, the soot smearing across his face. His arms tremble from the recoil, but his resolve does not falter. The petty officer who first shouted for help stands nearby now, watching in stunned silence. He knows what this moment means. He knows what the Navy has allowed, and what it has denied, and he knows he is witnessing something that breaks through all of those boundaries. No manual prepared Dorie for this. No orders assigned him this post. No training shaped the precision with which he fights. This is instinct. This is responsibility. This is courage that rises from the center of who he is. No one will know for certain how many planes he hit. Eyewitness accounts will differ. Reports will conflict. The truth will blur into the larger story of Pearl Harbor's chaos. But every witness agrees on one thing. He fought. He fought hard. And he held the line when his ship needed it most. These moments, lit by fire, smoke, and the steady rhythm of his shots, become the heart of his legend. A steward defending a battleship. A man rising far beyond the limits placed upon him. A defender standing in the middle of destruction with unshakable resolve. And as the attack continues, Dorie Miller remains at the gun, firing back until the moment the ship can stand no more. Holding the line. The attack reaches its most violent stage as you stay with Dorie on the slanted deck of the West Virginia. The air is thick with smoke and heat. Flames rise from ruptured fuel lines. Water pours into lower compartments, dragging the ship down inch by inch. But above the chaos, the Browning gun continues to thunder under Dorie's hands. He fires in controlled bursts, shifting his aim with instinctive precision. Each round cuts through the sky, forcing enemy aircraft to veer off course or abandon their attack runs. Even without training, his movements resemble the calm efficiency of a veteran gunner. Around him, sailors fight to save the ship. Damage control teams rush across the deck, spraying hoses toward fires that refuse to die. Others drag the wounded toward safer areas, their voices hoarse from shouting through smoke. Some simply run toward the next crisis, driven by duty, fear, or both. Yet in this storm of motion, Dorie stands out. Not because he is loud or commanding, but because his steadiness becomes a point of gravity, something men orient themselves to without realizing it. A dive bomber streaks toward the harbor. Its shadow glides across the deck like a dark warning. As it descends, bullets tear across the steel, sparks flying in sharp flashes. Dorie narrows his eyes, wipes the soot from his brow, and fires again. The recoil slams into him, but he does not step back. He follows the aircraft through its arc, forcing it to pull away from the ship sooner than intended. Another torpedo detonates against the hull. The ship lurches violently. The deck tilts further, sending tools, debris, and even bodies sliding toward the port side. Dorie spreads his stance, compensating for the angle. Shell casings spill in waves around his boots. Smoke curls around his shoulders, stinging his eyes and lungs. You can feel the physical strain starting to settle into him, not enough to slow him, but enough to remind you that even strength like his has limits. Still he fires. Still he holds the line. Another group of planes sweeps overhead, dropping bombs that ripple through the harbor with force that shakes every ship in Battleship Row. The glare of the explosions lights the smoke in harsh, violent flashes. For a moment, everything feels like motion and flame and sound. Through it all, Dorie remains focused. It is not the focus of someone seeking glory or recognition. It is the focus of a man who understands that the people around him are depending on everything he has to give. A sailor nearby pauses long enough to glance at him, eyes wide with respect and disbelief. He has never seen Dorie look this way, jaw set, shoulders ready, gaze fierce with determination. Another plane dives low, its guns flashing. Dorie fires a burst that forces it to climb abruptly, smoke trailing from its fuselage as it disappears behind a curtain of fire. More explosions follow in the distance. The harbor trembles. Men shout for help. Dorie keeps firing until the petty officer calls out through the smoke, voice strained and urgent. "We need to abandon this station." The ship is listing too far. The fires are spreading too quickly. The Browning gun, once their line of defense, is no longer sustainable as the West Virginia sinks lower into the harbor. Dorie releases the handles slowly, breathing hard, sweat and smoke running down his face. He steps back from the weapon, not because he is unwilling, not because he is afraid, but because the moment requires him elsewhere now. The gun falls silent behind him. The echoes of his shots linger in the thick air, and as he turns toward the wounded once again, you realize that his courage is not contained within the moments when he fired back. It continues now, in every step he takes toward helping the injured, in every life he tries to save as the ship falls apart around him. The battle is not over. But Dorie Miller has already become something larger than the Navy ever expected him to be. A defender, a steady presence in the fire, a man who refused to step back when others needed him most. A ship in its final hours. The assault on Pearl Harbor continues with unrelenting force. Every explosion adds new shock waves that ripple through the water, the sky, and the steel of the West Virginia. Even as the initial shock of the attack fades, the destruction only intensifies. You stay with Dorie as he moves away from the gun. His arms tremble from the recoil, his clothes soaked with sweat and smoke, but he does not stop. He turns immediately toward the next crisis, the wounded scattered across the slanted deck. A sailor near him collapses from exhaustion and burns. Dorie lifts him without hesitation, carrying him away from open flame toward a sheltered spot where medics wait. He returns for another man, then another, then another. The ship groans beneath him, a deep, painful sound as its damaged hull takes on more water. The tilt becomes sharper. Decks that were level minutes earlier now feel like ramps sloping toward the harbor. Fire erupts from a ruptured compartment, forcing Dorie to shield his face as he pushes past the heat. Smoke billows from vents, swirling in dense clouds that make every breath a struggle. Still, he moves with purpose. He joins a small group of sailors trying to pull open a jammed hatch where men are trapped inside. The metal is warped from the explosions. The heat burns their hands through their gloves. But together they force it open just enough for two stunned sailors to crawl out. Dorie helps them to their feet, guiding them toward safety. Above them, aircraft continue their attack runs. Bombs fall in terrifying arcs. Machine gun fire rips across the deck, sending shards of metal flying. The entire harbor becomes a battlefield. Nearby, a junior officer staggers, coughing hard, his uniform partially torn by shrapnel. He locks eyes with Dorie for a moment, a look filled with disbelief and gratitude, as if he's seeing Dorie for the first time in the full light of what he's done. "You all right, Miller?" the officer asks, voice raw. Dorie nods. "I'm fine, sir." But fine is not the word for what he is. Exhausted, shaken, battered by smoke and heat. Yes. But still moving, still helping, still holding the line in every way that matters. The ship takes another violent hit. Men stumble. Hoses whip across the deck. Some sailors lose their footing and slide toward the port side as water floods in from multiple points. It becomes clear. The West Virginia is sinking. Officers shout new orders. Damage control teams try to counterflood, attempting to keep the ship stable long enough to save as many men as possible. But the list grows steeper. The fires grow hotter. The flooding accelerates. Abandon ship stations. Get to clear areas. Move. Move. The words cut through the chaos. Dorie continues to help until he is certain the men around him are moving. He places one sailor's arm over his shoulder and supports him toward the ladder. Another sailor stumbles behind them, coughing uncontrollably. Dorie helps him too. He is almost always carrying someone, or supporting someone, or guiding someone forward. This is who he was long before Pearl Harbor. This is who he remains in its darkest hours. The West Virginia settles deeper into the water. The deck dips so sharply that men must cling to railings to keep from sliding. Firefighters, overwhelmed by the spreading flames, retreat toward safer positions. At last, an officer approaches Dorie, shouting over the noise. "Get off the deck! Move, Miller! We're losing her!" For the first time, he looks back toward the gun he left behind. The weapon is silent now, still smoking, surrounded by shell casings and debris. It stands as the symbol of what he became in those brief minutes, a man who stepped far beyond the limits the Navy placed on him. He turns away from it, breathing hard, and focuses once more on the men who need him. He moves toward the edge of the deck, supporting the injured, helping them climb down ropes, easing them into rescue boats or the water below when there is no other choice. He stays until the last possible moment, until the flames force him back, until the angle of the deck becomes impossible to navigate, until the ship he served on for years sinks too fast for anyone to remain safely aboard. Only then does Dorie step away, not because he wants to, but because staying would mean being swallowed by the harbor. As he climbs down, helping another wounded sailor with him, you see what the men around him already know. Courage has taken many forms today: gunfire, rescue, endurance, and Dorie Miller has carried all of them. When he reaches the water, the West Virginia continues her slow descent, smoke pouring from her decks, flames hissing as they meet the harbor. This ship was his world. And now, in the span of an hour, in the wake of destruction. When the last wave of Japanese aircraft finally pulls away from Pearl Harbor, the silence they leave behind feels unreal. Not peaceful, not calm, just hollow, the kind of silence that follows something too violent for the mind to absorb all at once. You stay with Dorie in those first stunned moments after the attack ends. The West Virginia lies low in the water, settling heavily on the harbor floor. Smoke rises from her twisted superstructure in thin, wavering columns. Fires continue to burn in pockets where hoses can't yet reach. The deck is warped and scarred, littered with debris, equipment, and the remains of a morning that will never be restored. Sailors stumble across the ship in states of shock. Some help medics treat the wounded. Some search the water for floating survivors. Some stand motionless, staring at the destruction with blank, disbelieving eyes. Dorie stands among them, breathing hard, his chest rising and falling in sharp, heavy draws. His arms ache from lifting men. His hands shake from the adrenaline still rushing through him. His throat burns from smoke inhalation. Yet even now, even in exhaustion, he moves toward the next task. A medic gestures frantically at a sailor struggling to stay conscious. Dorie kneels, lifting the man into a seated position so the medic can wrap bandages around his chest. The injured sailor clings to Dorie's sleeve, eyes unfocused, voice hoarse with shock. "It's all right," Dorie says quietly, not as reassurance he's certain of, but as the only comfort he can offer in a moment that feels beyond comprehension. Around them, the harbor groans with the aftermath. The Arizona is still burning violently, smoke pouring into the sky in dark, towering columns. Nearby ships list at dangerous angles or sit half-sunk in oily water. Boats race across the harbor, pulling survivors out of the thick black fuel coating the surface. The smell of burning oil and scorched metal mixes with a sharp scent of seawater, a combination that will stay with every man on this deck for the rest of his life. Dorie coughs hard, steadying himself with one hand on the railing. Then he rises and moves again. He helps a sailor whose leg is wounded too badly for him to walk. He supports another whose face is grey with shock. He lifts a third man, unconscious, limp, carrying him with the same care he showed during the attack. He does not stop to consider what he has already done. He does not pause to think about the gun he manned. He does not take a moment to rest. His instinct remains the same. Someone needs help. Help them. Officers move through the wreckage, calling out orders that try to make sense of the chaos. Set up aid stations. Clear this area. Check survivors on the starboard side. Watch the flooding. Their voices sound strained, uncertain, shaken by what they've witnessed. You watch Dorie glance around, taking in the devastation, the smoke, the flooded compartments, the injured men scattered across a ship he once walked so easily. And in his expression, behind the exhaustion, behind the soot, you sense the quiet weight of what this moment means. He knows the ship he called home is dying. He knows men he served alongside will not climb out of the water today. He knows the world beyond this harbor will never be the same. But above all, he understands something simple and immediate. The only way forward is to keep helping until he can no longer stand. He moves again, toward another wounded sailor, toward another burst of flame, toward another small corner of chaos he can steady with his hands. The attack is over, but his work is not. And in these quiet, exhausted minutes after the fire ends, the truth of who Dorie Miller is becomes even clearer. A man who steps forward. A man who carries others first. A man whose courage does not depend on the presence of a gun or the noise of battle. When the smoke settles and the nation begins to write the story of this day, these moments, the quiet ones, the steady ones, will matter just as much as the gunfire. A quiet hero among the ruins. The hours after the attack stretch into a long, heavy stillness. The chaos has passed, but its imprint remains everywhere you look. The harbor is covered in a thick layer of oil that glistens darkly on the surface. Smoke rises in thin lines from ships that only a short time ago were symbols of strength. The air carries the scent of fire, fuel, and grief. You stay close to Dorie as he moves through this quiet devastation. His clothes cling to him, soaked with sweat, seawater, and the grime of battle. His throat burns with every breath. His muscles protest with each step. But he continues working, as if stopping would mean acknowledging the full weight of what has just happened. He helps medics organize the wounded. He carries injured sailors to aid stations being set up on nearby ships. He fetches water, blankets, and supplies. He steadies men who have lost their bearings in the shock. Some sailors sit on overturned crates, staring at nothing. Others kneel beside railings, whispering names into the waves below. A few stand with hands clasped behind their heads, unable to process the destruction in front of them. Every face holds a story, and many of those stories intersect with Dorie's hands, lifting, carrying, supporting. A medic pauses beside him for a moment, studying the soot on his face and the cuts on his arms. "You hurt?" the medic asks. "No, sir," Dorie replies, and even now, exhausted and shaken, he means it. He sees others in greater need, and that is what matters. Nearby, officers inspect the damage, speaking in low voices about flooding, fire control, and salvage operations. They look at the wounded ship with a mix of sorrow and disbelief. The West Virginia was strong, dependable, built for war, and now she sits low in the harbor, resting on the shallow bottom. But in the eyes of the men who survived, the ship fought as hard as they did. Dorie walks past a group of sailors who look at him differently now. Not as a steward. not as someone assigned to serve meals and clean quarters, but as the man who carried them through the fire. One sailor approaches, still bandaged, still shaking. He places a hand on Dorie's shoulder. "You saved a lot of us today," he says quietly. Dorie doesn't respond right away. He's not used to praise, not comfortable with the idea of being singled out. He simply nods, offering a modest, "Just did what I could." It is the truth, not humility, truth. Because even now, even after everything he has done, he does not see himself as a hero. He sees himself as someone who acted because he had to, because lives depended on him, because the moment demanded it. You see him pause for the first time since the explosions. He looks out across the harbor, watching smoke drift over the water, listening to the distant sounds of cutting torches and rescue boats. There is grief in his expression, not loud, not dramatic, but deep and steady. He is thinking of the men who didn't make it, the ones he couldn't reach, the ones he carried too late, the ones who were trapped in compartments below deck. Grief comes quietly to men like him. It doesn't rise in shouts or tears. It settles in the shoulders, in the breath, in the silence between tasks. But even in grief, he continues helping. He assists a medic preparing the wounded for transport. He offers water to a sailor coughing violently from the smoke. He checks along the deck for anyone still alive who might have been overlooked. The sun climbs higher, revealing the full scale of the destruction. The light touches every scar on the ship, every ripple of fire-scorched metal, every shadow where loss lingers. And through it all, Dorie's presence remains steady, a quiet, grounding force in a place that feels shattered. He does not yet know how far his actions will travel. He does not know the world beyond the harbor will soon speak his name. He does not know he has become a symbol of courage for people who will never meet him. Right now, in these hours after the attack, he is simply a man doing what he has always done, stepping forward when others need him. A name begins to rise. In the days after the attack, Pearl Harbor becomes a place suspended between shock and duty. Smoke still drifts from wrecked ships. Salvage crews work around the clock. Families across the country wait for letters, telegrams, or news that may never come. And while the Navy begins its long process of rebuilding, another process starts quietly, one carried not by machines or officers, but by the voices of men who survived. You stay close to that ripple as it begins. Sailors from the West Virginia tell their stories to medics, to rescue crews, to officers gathering reports. They speak of torpedoes hitting the hull, of fire sweeping across the deck, of the water rising, and they speak, again and again, of the steward who carried the wounded and stood at the Browning gun long after others had fallen. Some describe his strength, some describe his calm. Some describe the way he kept firing even when smoke burned his eyes and the deck tilted beneath him. Their words begin to form a shape, the outline of a man whose actions saved lives when everything around him was falling apart. Reporters search for stories that give the nation something to hold on to in a moment of grief. They find fragments of testimony, small mentions of a black steward who fought back, who carried men to safety, who stood at a gun he was never trained to use. But for now, he is unnamed, a silhouette in the smoke, a mystery in the early accounts of the attack. Meanwhile, in black communities across the country, something else begins to move, quiet at first, then gathering strength. Readers of the Pittsburgh Courier, one of the most influential African-American newspapers of the era, learn of an unnamed black sailor who fought back during the attack on Pearl Harbor. The story stirs immediate interest, pride. Curiosity. A demand for recognition. Editorials question why this sailor's name has not been released. Letters pour in urging the Navy to identify him. Communities across the country begin to claim him as one of their own, a symbol of courage at a time when opportunities for black servicemen are severely limited. While the Navy processes statements and cross-checks reports, the pressure grows. Journalists call for clarity. Political leaders ask questions. Pastors speak his story in their churches. For families who had watched their sons leave home to serve in a segregated military, this unnamed hero becomes a reflection of what they always believed their sons capable of: valor, discipline, quiet dignity under fire. At last, after weeks of review, after sorting through witness testimonies and official damage logs, after confirming that multiple accounts describe the same man with the same steadiness, the Navy releases a name: Dorie Miller. When that name reaches the newspapers, something shifts in the national mood. Families repeat it to one another at dinner tables. Teachers speak it in classrooms. Communities celebrate it with the pride of seeing one of their own stand tall in a moment the world will never forget. Black newspapers print his photograph beside bold headlines. White newspapers begin to carry the story as well, describing a young steward who risked everything to defend his ship. In barbershops, men shake their heads in admiration. In kitchens, mothers tell their children about the man who fought back. In churches, pastors raise his story as proof that courage is not limited by rank, training, or the color of a uniform. The country finally sees the man behind the early rumors: strong, steady, humble, never seeking attention. And in this moment, as that photograph enters homes across America, a truth becomes clear. A steward's name has risen into the national memory, carried not by rank or recognition, but by the courage he showed in the fire. The stillness after the fire. The smoke had barely settled over Pearl Harbor when the silence returned, a strange, heavy kind of silence that doesn't feel like peace at all. It feels like the world catching its breath after screaming too long. In the days that follow, you begin to notice how the atmosphere aboard the battered ships around the harbor changes. Some men move quietly, still stunned. Others work without stopping, as if motion alone can keep the memories at bay. Everyone carries something different from that day, and somewhere in all of it, there is Dorie. Not the man with his hands on a machine gun, not the man pulling sailors from smoke and flame, not the man people now whisper about in corners of the harbor. Just a sailor, moving through the wreckage of a life that changed too fast. You see him early one morning, walking along the quiet stretch of dock behind the repair yards. His uniform is clean again, but there's a new weight in the way he moves, something subtle, like the body instinctively bracing for a blow that has already landed. He stops near the water's edge, looking down into the harbor where parts of ruined ships still rest just below the surface. The reflections of cranes ripple across the oil-streaked water. The air smells faintly of fuel, burning metal, and the salt of the Pacific. He doesn't speak. He rarely does in these days that follow. But you can tell he's beginning to understand that survival comes with its own demands. Quiet, unsettling questions that don't fade just because the explosions stopped. Behind him, sailors shuffle past on their way to repair duty. Some nod to him. Some don't know what to say. A few hold back, watching him with emotions even they can't name. Gratitude, maybe, or disbelief, or an uneasiness born from a world that has not yet learned how to treat someone like him fairly, even in the wake of heroism. One white petty officer hesitates as he approaches Dorie, a man older than him, someone who's worn the Navy's blue for 2 full decades. He wants to speak. You can see it. But he chooses silence, offering only a small, respectful nod before moving on. Respect is new, uneasy, not unwelcome, but complicated. Dorie returns the nod gently, almost cautiously, as if accepting too much of it might draw the wrong kind of attention. The Navy is a place where some recognitions travel fast, and others travel slowly, if they travel at all. There is no ceremony yet, no applause, no camera flashes, just long days of repair work, injuries, and exhaustion, and a man trying to find his footing in the middle of it. You follow him as he helps move crates of medical supplies toward a makeshift ward set up on a nearby pier. The doctors and nurses know what he did. Several give him looks that hover between gratitude and sorrow. One nurse squeezes his arm lightly as he passes. He nods once in acknowledgement, eyes calm but shadowed. Inside the ward, men lie in rows, bandaged arms, burned faces, broken bodies. Some recognize him, some don't. The ones who do say his name quietly, not loudly, not the way someone says the name of a legend, more like someone remembering a person who pulled them out of the dark. One sailor, wrapped in gauze up to his elbows, whispers, "Thanks." Dorie places a hand on his shoulder. Just for a moment. No speeches. No dramatics. Then he moves on. You notice something else too. The officers talk to him more. They look at him longer. They weigh their words carefully. But he still sleeps where he always slept. He still eats where he always ate. He still carries responsibilities that haven't changed with the retelling of the story. Recognition, in this moment, is only a shadow, present, but without shape. And each time someone approaches him with praise, he deflects gently. Not out of false modesty, not out of fear, but because the memory of that morning is too real, too close, too loud inside him. He remembers the fire, the screams, the weight of men over his shoulder, the sting of smoke in his lungs, the cold grip of fear that every man felt, regardless of rank or color. He remembers the gun, the recoil, the sound of a world on fire. But instead of telling these things, he simply nods. He lets the day move forward. He carries on. And as you watch him, you realize that bravery is not a single moment. It's everything that comes after. The steady, quiet steps taken when the world is no longer watching. The stillness after the fire. The silence that follows the chaos. The way a man walks through the wreckage of yesterday and chooses to keep going. Dorie keeps going. Not because he seeks honor, but because there are sailors still hurting, ships still broken, a war still unfolding, and because deep down he knows this truth. What he did on that morning was extraordinary, but what he chooses to do afterward might matter just as much. The stranger he becomes to himself. In the weeks after the attack, the harbor slowly begins to look less like a ruin and more like a workshop. Cranes swing overhead. Welders throw sparks into the air like artificial stars. Divers disappear below the surface and return with reports of twisted hulls and broken compartments. The water clears a little. The smoke thins. Ships straighten their backs. But inside the men who survived, nothing is simple. You stay close to Dorie through these days when the world around him is trying to decide what to do with his name. At first, it happens in small ways. A junior officer calls him in and asks him to go over it again, not as part of a formal inquiry, but as something closer to a story being collected. "Tell me what you did, Miller," the officer says, pen hovering over paper. So he does. Plainly. Carefully. Without embellishment. He talks about carrying wounded men. He talks about the confusion. He talks about reaching the gun station and finding no one there. He talks about taking the position, pulling the trigger, and firing until they told him to stop. He does not talk about fear. He does not talk about the moment he thought he might die. Those details he keeps inside, where they are easier to sort through alone. The officer writes quickly, nods, and thanks him. Dorie leaves the room the way he came in, quiet, composed, not entirely sure why his actions are being written down at all. For him, it was simple. For others, it is something else. Word spreads from ship to ship, from office to office, from mouth to mouth. Some sailors tell the story with awe, others with skepticism, a few with discomfort they try hard not to show. There are men who bristle at the idea that the most talked-about act of heroism in the harbor belongs to a black steward. They do not say it out loud, not where it would be written down. But you can feel it in the way they look away when his name is mentioned, in the way they grow suddenly quiet when others praise him. Dorie senses it too. He has lived long enough to recognize that kind of silence. But he does not let it sink into him. He has no time for resentment, no energy for anger. There are still decks to clean, still duties to perform, still sailors who wake in the night shaking, remembering the sound of bombs and the taste of smoke. He helps where he can. Some nights, when nightmares shake the bunks, you see him sit up and talk softly to the men around him, not with speeches, not with dramatic reassurances, just a few steady words, enough to remind them they are not alone. "You're here," he says quietly to one sailor whose hands tremble uncontrollably. "You made it. Breathe." The man listens to his voice, anchors himself to it, and slowly calms. In moments like this, Dorie is not a symbol. He is not a headline. He is simply what he has always been, a presence, a steadying force. But outside the narrow world of his bunk and his ship, something larger is moving. Reports travel to Washington. Commanders write summaries. Names are underlined. Actions are compared, sorted, weighed. Somewhere in an office he will never see, someone reads a line about a steward who manned a gun and helped save men from a burning battleship, and pauses just a little longer than they did with the previous paragraph. That pause is where history starts to shift. Back at Pearl Harbor, he only feels the slightest tremor of it. A chaplain stops him in the passageway one day and says, "I've heard what you did. The Lord was with you, son." Dorie nods respectfully, unsure what to do with the compliment. He does not feel chosen. He feels fortunate. He feels burdened. He feels changed. At times, he catches his reflection in a small metal mirror and sees not the man he was when he first joined the Navy, but someone carrying the weight of a mourning that refuses to let go of him. He does not quite recognize that man. Not yet. Then the letters arrive. At first they come in a trickle, then in a steady stream, forwarded from officers, passed along by chaplains, handed to him by petty officers who raise their eyebrows at the growing stack. They come from black families who heard his name in passing and held on to it like a small, bright flame. From fathers writing, "My boy wants to enlist now because he heard what you did." From mothers saying, "We prayed for you in church. We prayed for all of them. But we said your name out loud." From young men who confess, "I didn't think they would ever tell stories about us. Now they have to." Dorie reads each letter slowly, lips moving just a little as he follows every word. Sometimes he smiles, a shy, uncertain smile. Sometimes his eyes grow heavier, touched by a sorrow he does not fully share with anyone. He keeps most of the letters folded in a small bundle, tied with a thin piece of string, tucked deep into his belongings. He is not sure he deserves this level of attention. He knows men who did as much and more, who never made it out of the flames. He knows that chance walks through every battle, choosing at random who stays and who goes. Still, the words stay with him. People far from the harbor see him as something more than a steward now, more than a sailor, more than a man moving quiet and unseen through the strict lines of the Navy. They see him as proof that courage lives where others have refused to look, proof that bravery can break through the walls built to confine it, proof that a man pushed to the margins can, in a single unplanned moment, stand at the center of history. It is a heavy thing to be turned into proof. He never asked for it. He is not sure anyone should. You notice the way he carries this new weight. He walks with the same measured steps. He speaks in the same soft tone. He does the same work he did before. But somewhere inside, he is learning to live with the knowledge that the world beyond the ship has started to add expectations to his name. Expectations he never volunteered to meet. Officers visit him more often now. Some are sincere, asking about his well-being with genuine concern. Others seem unsure of how to speak to him, caught between rank, race, and a shifting sense of what is proper. They call him Miller. They call him sailor. A few call him hero, then quickly step back from the word as if it burned their tongue. He does not correct them. He does not invite the title. He simply nods and returns to duty. At night, when the harbor grows quiet and only the distant machinery continues its endless work, he lies awake longer than he used to. He thinks of the men who did not make it. He thinks of the gun, silent now. He thinks of his mother back home, who has not yet seen his face in a newspaper or heard his name on the radio, but would likely tell him the same thing she always has. Do what's right. Don't let it change who you are. And that becomes the quiet promise he makes to himself in those lonely hours. He will let the story travel, if it must. He will let others speak his name, if they wish, but he will not let it turn him into someone he does not recognize. He is still a steward, still a son, still a man who believes that courage is not found in the noise of admiration, but in the choices no one else sees. And as the weeks move on, as messages from higher command begin to shape the next phase of his life, you feel the shift beginning. The Navy is getting ready to show him to the world. He, meanwhile, is still coming to terms with himself. A nation takes notice. Once the Navy releases his name, the story of Dorie Miller stops being a rumor whispered by survivors, and becomes a headline carried from coast to coast. You follow the way his story moves, quietly at first, then with the strength of a tide gaining momentum. The Pittsburgh Courier prints a front-page article praising his courage, calling him a symbol of American heroism in a moment of national tragedy. Black newspapers across the country echo the sentiment. Churches read his story aloud during Sunday services. Communities speak his name with pride and reverence. For families who had watched their sons enter the military through doors that were barely open to them, Dorie's story becomes a rallying point, a reminder that courage is no one's exclusive property, and that men denied opportunity do not lack ability. White newspapers begin to pick up the narrative as well. Reporters describe a young steward who fired a .50 caliber gun, carried wounded sailors, and rescued men trapped under burning debris. They call him humble. They call him strong. They call him brave. Officers from the West Virginia confirm what the survivors have said, that Dorie acted with exceptional courage, that he stepped far beyond the duties of his rating, that he fought with a steadiness that saved lives. The story spreads from military circles into civilian ones. Radio programs mention his name. Civilians across the country write letters praising him. Some ask the Navy to award him a medal. Some believe he should be promoted. Others simply want him to be thanked. But behind these praises, another conversation grows. A conversation about what recognition means in a segregated military. Civil rights leaders point out that black sailors are not permitted to train as gunners, machinists, or radio men. Yet here is a man who picked up a weapon under fire and used it with the instinct of someone born for responsibility. They ask why the Navy allows men like him only to cook, clean, and serve. They ask why his courage is the exception the system never intended. These voices gain momentum, not with anger alone, but with pride, conviction, and a belief that heroism should open doors instead of highlight barriers. The Navy, aware of the growing pressure and the weight of public opinion, moves to recognize him formally. Dorie is called before Admiral Chester Nimitz, a man whose authority stretches across the Pacific. The Admiral speaks plainly, with respect in his tone that carries through every word. "Your actions were of the highest order," he says, "and you have earned this." Nimitz pins the Navy Cross to Dorie's uniform, the second highest decoration for valor in the United States Navy. Dorie stands straight as the medal is placed on his chest, but his expression remains modest. He accepts the honor with the quiet dignity that has shaped every part of his life. Cameras flash. Reporters take notes. The moment is recorded in newspapers that will travel across the nation. Yet even now, with a medal on his chest and the country speaking his name, Dorie does not consider himself a hero. He sees himself as a man who did what the moment demanded, a man who helped because others needed him, a man who stood behind a gun because there was no one else left to fight. As he steps away from the ceremony, the weight of the medal rests lightly against his uniform, but something deeper settles into the hearts of those watching him. This honor is not simply for what he did, but for what he represents. Strength in the face of limits, courage in the absence of opportunity, heroism born from instinct and heart. And although he will wear the Navy Cross with humility, the nation begins to realize that courage like his should never have been confined to the steward's branch. The weight of recognition. Recognition, when it finally arrives, does not fall on Dorie like a spotlight. It settles around him slowly, hesitantly, as though unsure whether he wants it at all. You follow him in the weeks after the medal ceremony, a time when the country sees him as a symbol, but he still feels like the same man who carried trays and washed linens aboard the West Virginia. Newspapers print his photograph. Radio hosts speak his name. Civilians send letters addressed simply to the hero of Pearl Harbor. And somehow, those letters find their way to him. But recognition does not bring comfort. It brings attention, a different kind of pressure, a different kind of expectation. For the first time in his life, people approach him not because of his work, but because of what he represents. Some want to shake his hand. Some want to tell him their family prayed for him. Some simply want to stand near the man whose courage reached them through headlines and rumors. But Dorie does not bask in any of it. He stands quietly at ceremonies, answering questions with short, respectful replies. He thanks those who congratulate him. He attends events he is requested to join, not out of pride, but out of a sense of duty, because he understands that this moment is larger than himself, larger than the medal, larger than the photograph printed in newspapers. He has become a symbol for millions of black Americans who have spent their lives fighting to be seen in a country that often refuses to look. You see it in the way people approach him, the fathers who grip his hand too tightly, the mothers who hold back tears, the young boys who stare up at him with wide, unblinking eyes. To them, he is not just a sailor. He is proof. Proof that courage knows no restrictions. Proof that a man's worth is not defined by the role he is told to play. Proof that someone who looks like them can step forward when history calls. But recognition also brings frustration, not from him, but from those who see the limits still placed around him. Civil rights leaders write editorials asking why a hero is still denied opportunities offered to others, why he wears a medal for gunnery, yet is not allowed to train as a gunner, why the Navy applauds his bravery, yet maintains the structures that kept him from ever receiving proper training or advancement. Dorie does not speak publicly about these issues. He has never been a man to raise his voice. He has never sought conflict. He simply continues his duties, wearing the Navy Cross with quiet humility, serving where he is assigned, doing the work placed in his hands. But you can feel the tension in the air around him, the weight of expectation, the burden of representation, the quiet knowledge that recognition has not erased any of the barriers he lived with since the day he enlisted. He returns home briefly on leave. His family greets him with joy, relief, and pride so deep it reshapes the room. Neighbors gather outside just to see him. Children climb onto porches to get a glimpse of the man whose story traveled farther than any of them ever imagined. Yet even here, even in the familiarity of home, Dorie remains steady, grounded, unchanged. He laughs softly with friends. He hugs his mother with the tenderness of a son who knows how close he came to never returning. He speaks humbly about the attack, never emphasizing the moments that made him famous. He simply says, "I did what I could," and for him, that has always been enough. But the world around him is shifting, pulling him toward a future that demands more of his courage, not in battle, but in the quiet endurance of being a symbol in a time that desperately needed one. Recognition has found him. A symbol carried quietly. As the months pass, Dorie's name moves through the country like a quiet current. He becomes someone Americans point to when they need a reminder that ordinary people can rise in extraordinary ways. But fame, for a man like him, is a strange and uneasy companion. You stay close to him during this period, a time when he is caught between two worlds, the one that suddenly celebrates him, and the one that still confines him. The Navy assigns him to publicity tours. He attends events in uniform, wearing the Navy Cross on his chest, standing beside officers who now speak of him with respect. Crowds applaud when he steps onto a stage. People lean forward to hear him speak. He is introduced as a hero, a symbol, a man whose courage inspired millions. But Dorie is not built for the spotlight. His voice is quiet. His words are simple. He answers questions politely, but the attention makes him uncomfortable. He is asked repeatedly how it felt to fire the Browning gun. He shrugs, saying only, "I did what needed to be done." He is asked whether he was scared. He nods and replies, "Everyone was scared." To him, it is the truth. The honest truth of a man who never imagined that what he did would be seen as exceptional. Yet outside the halls where he speaks, another movement grows. Civil rights organizations use his image in campaigns calling for full integration of the armed forces. Newspapers run editorials asking why the Navy Cross recipient is still restricted to the steward's branch. Young black men write to him, saying his story gave them the courage to enlist. Black women write saying he gave them hope in a country that rarely gives them anything at all. He becomes more than a man. He becomes a mirror, reflecting both the promise and the contradictions of America. And with that symbolic power comes a quiet, heavy burden. Dorie feels it in the way people look to him for answers he does not have. He feels it in the way journalists frame questions that demand he speak for millions. He feels it in the way his presence becomes a statement, even when he is silent. He is proud of the honor, proud of the medal, proud of the role he played in defending his ship. But he is also aware, perhaps more aware than anyone on those stages, of the gulf between recognition and equality. Even with the Navy Cross pinned to his chest, he is not allowed to train for the jobs he proved capable of. He is not allowed to advance into technical roles. He is not allowed the opportunities others with fewer skills are given freely. He carries this quietly, never speaking of it openly, but you can feel the weight of it settle across his shoulders. His family notices it when he visits home. His mother watches the way he avoids conversations about fame. His brothers notice how his laughter feels different, softer, shorter, edged with something unspoken. To them, he is still Dorie, the boy who grew up working hard, who helped on the farm without complaint, who protected his siblings from bullies. They love him not for the medal, but for the way he has always been. And maybe that is why he never lets recognition change him. He knows who he is. He knows what he did. The rest, the attention, the pressure, the expectations, never reach the center of him. As the months turn into a year, the country continues to speak his name. But Dorie himself feels restless. He does not want to spend the war giving speeches. He does not want to travel from city to city, being applauded for a single moment in his life. He wants to serve again, to return to duty, to be where he belongs, with the men who wear the same uniform, facing the same dangers, carrying the same burdens. And although the Navy is hesitant to risk the life of someone who has become a symbol, he insists. This is not the end of his story. He knows it. And soon he will return to the sea, to the danger, to the uncertainty, to the place where he feels his service truly belongs. Not in front of crowds, but alongside sailors. And with that choice, the path of his story bends toward its final, quiet chapter. The months that followed. The weeks after Pearl Harbor unfold in a strange, uneven rhythm. The nation wakes each morning to headlines filled with grief, strategy, and uncertainty. Ships are counted. Casualties are tallied. Families wait for news that arrives too slowly, or not at all. And as the country enters a war it can no longer avoid, a quieter story moves beneath the surface, one carried by the voices of sailors who survived. You follow that current as it begins to gather strength. Wherever survivors gather to speak, one name rises again and again: Dorie Miller. His story spreads from one mess hall to another, from barracks to offices, from sailors to officers, from officers to reporters. And soon, Dorie finds his life moving in ways he never expected. He is pulled into interviews, asked to describe the attack again and again, the explosions, the fire, the wounded he carried, the gun he manned without training. Reporters scribble notes. Shutters click. Radio hosts lean in, waiting for the soft voice they have been told belongs to a hero. But Dorie never gives them the story they want. He speaks plainly, modestly, offering only what he remembers, not the dramatized version the nation is hungry for. "It all happened too fast to think about," he says again and again. "I just helped who I could." Crowds applaud. Officers nod with respect. Communities praise him with pride that spans far beyond uniform or state lines. But inside him, recognition does not settle easily. You see it in the way he grows quiet after ceremonies, in the way he steps away from crowded rooms to stand alone near a window or a doorway, searching for something familiar in a world that now expects him to speak for more than himself. Then come the letters. Stacks of them. Some addressed simply to the hero of Pearl Harbor. Some from children who draw pictures of ships and planes. Some from mothers who thank him for saving men they will never know. Some from young black men who have never seen someone who looks like them honored by the military in such a public way. He reads them slowly, carefully, with a sense of responsibility that makes his chest tighten. One letter comes from a boy in Mississippi. "I want to be brave like you. I didn't know we could do things like that." Another from a teacher in Chicago. "Your courage is being taught in my classroom. My students believe in you." And from across the country, pastors write to him. "Your story gave our congregation a reason to lift their heads." The weight of these words, the expectations tucked between each sentence, begin to settle on Dorie's shoulders. He is humbled by the gratitude, but uneasy with the way strangers imagine him, as unbroken, as fearless, as something more than the man who stepped behind a gun because no one else could. He sometimes sits alone at night, letters spread out in front of him, wondering whether he can live up to the image others now paint of him. Meanwhile, the larger world continues circling his name. Civil rights leaders praise him in speeches. Journalists call him proof that bravery recognizes no color. Politicians mention him as a symbol of unity in a divided time. But in the middle of this growing storm of attention, Dorie remains steady, humble, grounded. He does not chase the image the country builds. He does not try to shape himself into the figure people expect him to be. He simply remains who he has always been, a man who did what the moment demanded, a man who never asked for applause, a man who still feels more comfortable working quietly behind the scenes than standing on a stage with cameras facing him. As the months pass, his name rises higher than he ever imagined, but his spirit stays close to the deck plates, close to the work he knows, close to the sense of purpose born long before Pearl Harbor. And the more the world lifts him onto a platform, the more he feels a quiet tug in the opposite direction, a pull toward the life he knew before recognition, toward the simplicity of duty, toward the sea. The applause grows louder. The praise grows brighter. But inside him, a simple truth begins to take shape. He did not join the Navy to be a symbol. He joined to serve. And that desire, steady and unshaken, will soon guide him toward a decision that no medal could influence. The man behind the medal. The more the nation speaks his name, the more Dorie feels the distance between what people say about him and who he actually is. You see that distance clearly in the quiet moments, the ones that slip between ceremonies, after the applause fades, when the crowds disperse, and he is left alone with his thoughts. He never sought attention, not as a boy in Texas, not as a steward in the Navy, not on that burning deck at Pearl Harbor, and now, in the months that follow, he struggles to understand why people expect him to speak with authority on matters he has never claimed to represent. Journalists crowd around him, asking questions that feel too heavy, too political, too detached from the reality he lived. What were you thinking when you fired the gun? What does your courage say about the black race? What message do you want to send to America? He always gives the same answer. I did what had to be done. But the world keeps shaping his story into something larger, something symbolic, something he never asked for. Church leaders write to him calling him a beacon. Civil rights organizers call him evidence. Politicians call him hope. Newspapers call him a national example. All of it is well-meaning. All of it comes from admiration. But none of it feels like him. You see the way he carries this weight. Modestly, silently, with the same steadiness he brought into the fire. He attends banquets where long tables stretch under bright lights, where speeches praise him with words he would never use for himself. He stands at podiums while audiences lean in, waiting for him to deliver something profound. He gives them honesty instead. There were men braver than me that day, he says. Men who didn't make it home. His humility disarms people, but it also deepens the myth. The quieter he becomes, the more people project greatness onto him. You see the strain too. It lives in his posture after long events, in the way he loosens his collar after applause dies down, in the way his eyes drift toward the doors, seeking an exit from the expectations that crowd him. He wants simplicity. He wants routine. He wants the comfort of work he understands. Not an audience. Not a spotlight. Not a platform. And beneath it all, beneath the praise and attention, is a truth he rarely speaks aloud. He misses the ship. Not the smoke or the fire, or the terror of that morning, but the camaraderie, the quiet conversations on deck, the satisfaction of hard work done well, the feeling of belonging to something steady. He misses being part of a crew, instead of being the person people point toward. And then there is another layer, one even heavier. The Navy Cross sits on his uniform, recognizing a moment of undeniable valor. But the system around him remains unchanged. He is still restricted to the steward's branch, still barred from training for the very job his medal represents, still limited by rules written by people who praise his courage, while refusing to let men like him rise. He never voices bitterness, never raises his voice, never speaks of the contradiction. But you see the truth in small moments. The way his jaw tightens when he reads articles questioning why he hasn't been promoted. The way he steps aside when officers discuss policy. The way he folds letters from civil rights leaders with quiet respect, and slips them into his pocket. Recognition has lifted him higher than he imagined, but it has not freed him. And as the months pass, as the speeches continue, as the expectations grow larger than any one man can carry, a new feeling settles into his heart. This is not where he belongs. Not on stages. Not in newspapers. Not in front of crowds waiting for him to speak wisdom he does not claim. He belongs at sea. He belongs with sailors. He belongs where duty is measured in action, not applause. The man behind the medal is still the man he always was. Quiet, steady, humble, driven by responsibility, instead of recognition. And soon, that truth will guide him away from the world that praises him, toward the world that understands him. Toward the fleet, toward the Pacific, toward the final chapter of his life. Turning away from applause. The more time passes, the more the applause around Dorie begins to feel like a wall, a bright, polished barrier separating him from the life he actually wants. You stay with him during this slow, quiet shift, watching how his heart begins to turn, away from ceremonies, away from speeches, away from the polished handshakes and rehearsed introductions. Most men he meets during these months look at him with admiration. Some look at him with awe. A few look at him with guilt. Officers who know his courage surpasses the limits of the rating he is confined to. But none of them see the truth rising quietly inside him. This isn't who he wants to be. Not forever. Not even for another year. At one reception, a captain lifts a glass and calls him a living reminder of American bravery. People applaud. Flashes burst from cameras. Dorie stands politely, hands at his sides, trying not to think about the fact that he would rather be peeling potatoes in a ship's galley than standing beneath chandeliers that make his eyes ache. Another day, he is asked to reenact the moment he manned the gun, to hold the handles, to pose for the camera, to recreate the stance that has become iconic in the newspapers. He does it, but something inside him pulls back hard. He knows the truth. He knows what the gun felt like in his hands. He knows the heat of the flames, the scream of the aircraft, the chaos no photographer could ever capture. Being asked to reenact it feels wrong. It feels hollow. It feels like something sacred reduced to a performance. After the event, he steps outside into the cool evening air, leaning against a railing to breathe. A young ensign follows him out, embarrassed, apologetic. "They shouldn't have asked you to do that," the ensign says. Dorie shrugs to ease the man's discomfort. "It's all right," he answers, but his voice doesn't hold conviction. The ensign hesitates, then asks, "What do you want, Miller? I mean, after all this?" For a long moment, Dorie doesn't speak. He looks out at the harbor, at the silhouettes of ships rocking gently in the dark. He watches their lights flicker across the water like memories. Then he answers quietly, honestly, "I want to go back to the fleet." The ensign nods. He understands more than his rank suggests. And that simple truth, that quiet sentence spoken into the night air, becomes the turning point. From that moment on, every ceremony, every interview, every appearance feels like a step away from where he belongs. He begins requesting reassignment, politely at first, then with increasing firmness. At one point he tells an officer, "I enlisted to serve, sir, not to make speeches." The Navy hesitates. They know he is valuable as a symbol, a living example of courage, a public reminder of the nation's resilience after Pearl Harbor. Risking his life again feels almost irresponsible to them. A waste, some call it privately. Others fear the backlash if something happens to their decorated hero. But Dorie cannot accept that logic. He was not given a medal to be displayed. He was not praised so he could be protected from the danger his friends still face. He is not willing to let other men fight while he stays safe behind the curtain of publicity. In his quiet, steady way, he insists. He goes through proper channels. He writes requests. He speaks respectfully to those above him. But behind every word is a truth he cannot ignore. "I'm a sailor. I need to serve." And slowly, reluctantly, the Navy realizes that keeping him away from the sea is the very opposite of honoring who he is. The path begins to open. Not quickly, not easily, but it opens. and the applause he once stood inside begins to fade into the distance, step by step, as he walks toward the place where he always belonged, toward the fleet, toward the Pacific, toward the next chapter of his life, one the cameras will never see. Choosing to serve again. The Navy eventually grants what Dorie has been asking for, not because the system suddenly understands him, but because even those who hesitated can see that a man like him does not belong behind microphones when a war is being fought across the Pacific. You stay with him in the final days before he returns to the fleet. The transition is quiet, stripped of ceremony, shaped by the steady determination that has guided him since Pearl Harbor. He packs his sea bag with practiced movements, uniforms folded neatly, letters tucked carefully between layers of fabric, the Navy Cross placed in its case and laid gently at the bottom. He does not display the medal. He does not talk about it. He carries it the way he carries everything, with humility, with a sense of duty, with a belief that the moment that earned it does not erase the work that still needs to be done. As he prepares to leave, he visits home one last time. His mother greets him at the door, holding him tightly, her arms lingering around him as if she's trying to memorize the shape of him. She has always carried her strength quietly, the kind of strength forged by long days, hard years, and a faith deeper than fear. But even she cannot hide her worry. "You've done enough," she tells him softly. "You don't need to prove anything more." Dorie shakes his head with gentle conviction. "It's not about proving anything, Mama," he says. "It's about doing my part." She studies his face, searching the lines of a son she raised to be careful, to be respectful, to be responsible. But she also sees something she cannot argue with, the deep, unwavering instinct to serve. She nods, not in approval, but in acceptance, in understanding. "I'll pray for you," she whispers. "I know," he replies, and the warmth in his voice carries both comfort and sorrow. Later that evening, he walks the familiar roads of his hometown, past porches where neighbors greet him with quiet pride, past children who run up to ask him questions about ships and uniforms, past the places where he worked as a boy, before he ever imagined crossing oceans. He stops by the water tower and looks out at the horizon, a horizon that once felt endless and distant, but now feels like something he is called back to. The next morning, he boards a train with other sailors. Some recognize him, some whisper his name, but most simply see another uniform, another man heading into the uncertainty of war. And that is exactly how he prefers it. On the journey west, he sits by the window, watching the landscape roll by. Farms, towns, mountains, desert, the slow shift of the country stretching beneath the wheels. There is a calm inside him, not eagerness, not thrill, but a quiet readiness, a sense of returning to something unfinished, a sense of being exactly where he is meant to be. When he reaches the coast, the sea air hits him with familiarity, salt and wind and the low hum of ships preparing for deployment. He steps onto the dock, looks out at the sprawling harbor, and feels a piece of himself settle into place. This is his world. This is his purpose. This is the life he chose. The Navy assigns him to the USS Liscome Bay, an escort carrier destined for service in the Pacific Theater. He boards without ceremony, without speeches, without cameras. Just another sailor returning to the rhythm of the war. Some of the crew recognize him immediately. A few hesitate before approaching. One finally steps forward. A young man barely out of training. You're Miller, aren't you?" The one from Pearl Harbor. Dorie nods. But instead of letting the moment swell, he redirects it gently. "Yeah," he says. "Where do you need me?" And just like that, the legend slips back into uniform, into duty, into the quiet of service. He blends into the crew, not by hiding, but by being exactly who he has always been, steadfast, humble, steady as steel. When the Liscome Bay sails out to sea, the deck beneath his feet feels like home. The wind carries the same salt he breathed on the West Virginia. The horizon stretches the same way, endless, uncertain, full of dangers he knows too well. But he does not turn away. He chose this. Not the medal, not the praise, not the legacy others tried to shape for him. He chose service. He chose the sea. He chose to stand with the men who call him shipmate, and with each passing mile, the applause grows quieter behind him. Only duty remains, and he walks toward it without fear. A return to the sea. When the speeches end and the applause fades, Dorie stands at a quiet crossroads in his life. The country sees him as a hero, but he does not want to live as a symbol. He wants to serve, to work, to return to the rhythm of Navy life that shaped him long before the world learned his name. You stay close to him as he prepares to leave the safety of publicity tours behind. He folds his uniform carefully, tucks his Navy cross into its case, and writes a short letter to his mother saying only that he is returning to duty, that he is well, that she shouldn't worry. Then he boards a transport ship bound for the Pacific. As he steps onto the deck, he inhales the scent of salt air, feeling something settle inside him, a sense of rightness, a sense of belonging. This is where he has always felt most himself, not in auditoriums, not in newsreels, not on stages where people hold their breath waiting for him to speak. Here, with the sea stretching in all directions, with the engine humming beneath his feet, with sailors moving in steady patterns across the deck, he feels grounded again. The Navy assigns him to the escort carrier USS Liscome Bay, a smaller ship compared to the great battleship he once served on, but essential to the Pacific campaign. The Liscome Bay is new, fast, and built for support, carrying aircraft, supplies, and the weight of young men preparing for battles far from home. Dorie steps aboard and blends easily into the rhythm of the crew. He returns to his duties without complaint. He works hard, keeps quiet, follows orders, and builds camaraderie with the men around him. Some recognize him immediately. They whisper his name with surprise, stealing glances as if they're still trying to reconcile the stories they heard with the calm, modest man who stands beside them. A few eventually gather the courage to speak. "You're Miller, aren't you? The one from Pearl Harbor? You really fired that big gun?" He nods politely, offers a small smile, answers their questions briefly, then goes back to work. He does not correct their stories. He does not embellish them. He simply lives as he always has, steady, respectful, diligent. The crew grows to respect him in a different way, not because of the medal, but because of the man they see every day, a man who works harder than anyone, who helps without needing to be asked, who listens more than he speaks. Some nights, after long shifts, he stands alone on the deck, looking out at the dark Pacific horizon. The sea is vast, unpredictable, beautiful in its own way. But beneath its surface lie dangers he cannot see, dangers every sailor in the Pacific understands too well. Still, he remains calm. He did not return to the war seeking another moment of recognition. He returned because service feels right, because men he respects are still out here, risking their lives, because he does not want to be protected while others are sent into danger in his place. On the Liscome Bay, he finds exactly what he wanted: a purpose without attention, a role without spectacle, a chance to be part of something larger than himself. Life aboard the escort carrier settles into a routine. Early mornings, long shifts, drills that test every muscle and every instinct, quiet conversations in the mess hall, moments of laughter that break the tension of war. And though he rarely speaks of his past, the men around him feel it. A quiet strength that seems to anchor the ship, a steadiness that makes even the youngest sailors straighten their posture in his presence. The Pacific stretches endlessly around them, a deep, shifting blue. Some days the water is calm. Some days storms whip across the deck. Some days the horizon looks peaceful enough to believe the war is far away. But the war is never far. And soon, the Liscome Bay will carry its crew, and Dorie Miller, into a moment none of them can escape. For now, though, in these quiet days before fate turns, you see him as he wants to be seen, not as a symbol, not as a headline, not as the hero of Pearl Harbor, but as a sailor, a crewman, a man fulfilling the duties that have always shaped him, a man at sea. Into the heart of the Pacific. Life aboard the Liscome Bay continues with the steady rhythm of a ship always preparing for the next assignment. The Pacific stretches endlessly around her, calm some days, restless others, but always reminding the crew how far they are from home. You stay close to Dorie during these weeks, watching how easily he fits into the quiet machinery of ship life. He rises before dawn. He works without complaint. He moves through his duties with the same steadiness that marked him long before the world knew his name. He laughs quietly with shipmates, shares meals with young sailors still getting used to the rolling deck, and listens patiently when others speak of fears they don't share with anyone else. No one treats him like a celebrity here. Not really. There are whispered moments of recognition, yes. The younger men telling each other, "That's him, that's Miller," or "He's the one who fired back." But Dorie never lets the attention shape the space around him. He redirects conversations, shrugs off praise, and focuses on the work in front of him. For him, service has always been simple: a job to do, a team to support, a responsibility to uphold. The Liscome Bay participates in patrols, escort missions, and preparations for the Gilbert Islands campaign, a chain of operations that will bring them into the center of a vast battlefield. The crew senses the tension building as each day draws them closer to action. Planes take off more frequently. Pilots review briefings with sharper focus. The ship's intercom rings out with drills, warnings, and small adjustments that signal they are entering dangerous waters. The Pacific, once a serene horizon, now feels charged, as if the sea itself understands what is coming. Dorie notices the change too. He watches the pilots strap into their aircraft with quiet determination. He sees the deck crews move faster, coordinating takeoffs with practiced precision. He hears officers speak in low voices about enemy movements, weather conditions, and the risks ahead. Yet he remains steady. This steadiness does not come from fearlessness, because he feels fear like anyone else, but from acceptance. He has already lived through one attack that tore a harbor apart. He knows the sound of bombs falling, the heat of flame, the weight of injured men in his arms. He knows what it means to face death and choose action over shock. That experience does not make him invincible, but it makes him prepared. Sailors come to him with quiet questions. What do we do when something hits the ship? How do you stay calm when everything goes wrong? Were you scared at Pearl Harbor? He answers with honesty. You don't think ahead, he says. You take care of the man next to you. That's all you can do. His words are not heroic. They are practical, real, grounded in the truth of someone who has carried men through smoke and fire. The Liscome Bay continues deeper into the Pacific, supporting the American assault on the Gilbert Islands, specifically the invasion of Makin Atoll. The fighting is fierce on the beaches. Planes from the Liscome Bay take off repeatedly to support ground troops, bombing enemy positions, and scouting for counterattacks. The ship becomes a lifeline for men fighting far ahead of them. Every plane that returns is a small victory. Every pilot who does not come back leaves a weight across the deck that the crew carries silently. Dorie works harder than ever. He helps where he can, moves supplies, supports the men who support the pilots, and ensures every part of the operation runs smoothly. But beneath the noise of engines and the constant activity, there is an undercurrent, a sense that something is shifting beneath the surface of the sea. Some sailors mention strange vibrations felt along the hull. Others talk about enemy submarines rumored to be operating in these waters. Officers grow more alert, watching sonar screens with uneasy eyes. The Pacific holds its breath, and though no one can articulate why, the men aboard the Liscome Bay feel that the safest moments of this mission have already passed. They just don't know how soon their fears will be realized. For now, Dorie serves with quiet dignity, unaware that the final chapter of his life is approaching, swiftly, silently, just beneath the waves. The torpedo in the dark. The sun rises quietly over the Pacific on November 24, 1943. The air is warm. The sea is calm. To the men aboard the Liscome Bay, the morning feels deceptively peaceful, like an interlude before the next round of operations. You stand with Dorie on the deck as the ship prepares to resume flight operations. Aircraft are positioned. Fuel hoses are checked. Sailors move with the familiar rhythm of duty. There is no sign, none, of the danger lurking just beneath the surface. A Japanese submarine, the I-175, has maneuvered into the carrier group's path during the night. Its periscope rises briefly above the waves, observing the tight formation of American ships. The Liscome Bay, with her store of bombs, aviation fuel, and munitions, becomes the submarine captain's chosen target. Below deck, sailors joke quietly. Pilots prepare for another long day. Officers review schedules. Dorie moves through his morning duties with his usual quiet steadiness. Then, without warning, just as sunlight breaks across the water, a lookout spots the telltale white trail of a torpedo slicing toward the ship. The alarm sounds, a sharp, urgent cry that rips through the calm. But there is no time. The torpedo strikes the Liscome Bay near the stern, hitting the one place where its damage will be most catastrophic: the ship's bomb storage and aviation fuel tanks. The explosion is instant. A violent, consuming flash erupts through the lower decks. A blast so powerful it tears through steel, shatters compartments, and sends a column of fire shooting into the sky. You feel the deck shudder with a force that throws men off their feet. The carrier tilts sharply, smoke billowing in massive plumes from the gaping wound in her side. The blast ignites fuel lines, bombs, and ammunition stores in rapid succession. A chain reaction roars through the ship, each secondary explosion larger than the last. Below deck, corridors vanish in an instant. Compartments collapse. Lights flicker and die. Men are caught in the firestorm before they have time to process what has happened. Above deck, chaos erupts. Dorie steadies himself against the railing, eyes wide with disbelief as flames tear through the lower decks. He pushes off the railing and runs toward the nearest group of sailors who have been knocked down by the blast, helping them to their feet, guiding them away from the spreading fire. The heat is overwhelming, a wave of burning air that makes every breath feel like inhaling flame. Smoke rolls across the deck, thick and choking. The ship's sirens scream. Officers shout orders drowned out by the roar of the fire. Men scramble to move away from the blast zone, but the flames spread too quickly. The entire stern is engulfed. Dorie moves toward the injured, instinct, again, guiding him forward. He helps a sailor with a shattered leg, lifting him despite the rising heat. He supports another man who can barely breathe through the smoke. He turns, searching for anyone else who needs help. But the explosions continue, one after another, each one rocking the deck with terrifying force. A final, enormous blast tears through the ship, strong enough to lift the carrier out of the water, strong enough to knock men to the deck miles away, strong enough to signal that the Liscome Bay is beyond saving. The ship begins to sink almost immediately. Officers shout for men to abandon ship, but many are already lost. Others leap into the burning water, trying to escape the flames consuming the deck. Dorie looks toward the sea, then back toward the men who still lie injured behind him. He does not hesitate, even as the fire advances, even as the deck tilts sharply beneath his feet, even as the ship groans with the sound of collapsing steel. He turns back toward those who need help. It is the same choice he made at Pearl Harbor, the same instinct that defined him long before the world knew his name. The flames rise higher. The ship begins to break apart. And without fanfare, without speeches, without witnesses who can record his final movements, Dorie Miller continues to help until the Pacific takes the Liscome Bay beneath the waves. The ship sinks in minutes. Of the more than 900 men aboard, only a fraction survive. Dorie is not among them. He disappears into the smoke and fire, a hero for the second time, in a moment the world would never see. The sea that kept his final moments. The Liscome Bay disappears beneath the Pacific in less than 23 minutes. A carrier swallowed by fire, smoke, and the deep blue water that had carried her only hours before. Rescue ships race toward the survivors. Debris floats across the surface. Wooden planks, torn uniforms, fragments of the carrier's flight deck, and the faint cries of wounded men calling out for help. But the ocean is wide, and most of the men who served on the Liscome Bay will never be found. You follow the aftermath through the accounts of those who survived. Men pulled from the water coughing up oil. Men burned and dazed. Men who watched flame and darkness swallow everything around them. They speak of confusion, of explosions that felt endless, of the blinding fire roaring through the lower decks like a living thing. They speak of jumping into the burning sea, of swimming blindly through smoke and oil, of clinging to floating debris until the rescue crews arrived. Some recall seeing Dorie during the early minutes of the blast, moving toward the wounded, helping men who were too injured or stunned to save themselves. None could say where his final steps led him, only that he kept helping until he vanished into the chaos. And just like that, a life shaped by courage ended in the same quiet, selfless way it had always been lived. No spotlight, no witness, no final speech. Just a man doing what he believed was right, even when the world around him collapsed. The sea holds his last moments, not as a grave marked with stone, but as a boundless place that carries the memories of those who saw him stand tall when others needed him most. News of the carrier's sinking reaches the mainland weeks later. Families wait for letters that do not come. The Navy releases casualty lists slowly, heavy with names from a ship that vanished too fast for most men to escape. In Waco, Texas, Dorie's family receives the official notification: missing in action, presumed dead. His mother holds the telegram with trembling hands, reading the words again and again, as if repetition might alter their meaning. Neighbors gather to comfort her, but she stands firm, the strength she carried her whole life rising in her eyes. He served the way he lived, she says quietly, with all his heart. Across the country, communities mourn him. Newspapers print the news with sorrow and admiration. Those who had celebrated him months earlier now carry the weight of a different kind of tribute. In black communities, the grief is deep and personal. He was more than a sailor to them. He was a symbol of possibility, of courage in the face of a world that restricted his every step. Churches hold services in his honor. Veterans speak his name with reverence. Writers describe him as a man who showed the nation the truth of Black American valor, not through speeches or politics, but through instinctive bravery in the worst hours of war. The Navy acknowledges his sacrifice, but history moves slowly. Integration of the armed forces is still years away, and the country continues to wrestle with the meaning of a hero who was never given the opportunities he earned. Yet Dorie's story refuses to fade. Sailors remember the calm in his voice. Officers remember the strength in his hands. Survivors remember the man who carried them through smoke and fire. Communities remember the pride he awakened in them. And the country remembers the steward, who became a defender, who stepped forward in moments when stepping back was the easier choice, who showed that courage is not a matter of training or rank, but of heart. In the quiet that follows the tragedy of the Liscome Bay, you feel the truth of his life settle like a tide coming to rest. He did not live for recognition. He did not fight for fame. He did not seek the role history gave him. But when the moment demanded it, he gave everything he had. And though the sea keeps his final moments, his story rises above it, carried by those who lived because he did. Aftermath, the echo that stayed behind. When the guns fell silent, when the smoke drifted away from the burning ships, and when the Pacific settled into its long, slow breath again, the story of Dorie Miller did not sink beneath the waves with the West Virginia, or the Liscome Bay. It lingered. It stayed. It lived on in the people who carried it forward, not as a tale of glory, but as a reminder of what courage looks like. When no one expects it. You walk through the quiet that follows his story now. The kind of quiet that rises after great noise. When the world begins to understand what it has gained, and what it has lost. There is no single monument for him here in these waters. No carved stone where his footsteps ended. No grave marked with dates and rank. Instead, there is the sea, wide, unbroken, holding the last moments of a man who lived without fanfare, and fought without hesitation. For some, his story begins at Pearl Harbor, with the gun no one taught him to fire, with the wounded he carried through fire and smoke. For others, it begins on a farm in Texas, with a boy who learned strength long before he learned uniformed discipline. A boy who knew that hard work and devotion were not things you said, but things you lived. And for many, his story ends in the dark water off Macon Atoll, where a ship vanished faster than messages could be sent, where courage met fire one last time, quietly, steadily, with the same instinct that guided him through the worst morning of the war. But that is not the whole story, not the heart of it, not the echo that remains. What stays, what endures, is the truth that courage comes from places no hierarchy can predict. It appears in men who were never given the chance to prove themselves. It rises in the quiet workers, the overlooked, the ones placed in the background. It rises in people who are told they belong in the margins, and who step out of them the moment others need them most. You picture Dorie in the final hours before the attack on Pearl Harbor, a steward walking across a calm deck, thinking of breakfast trays and morning duties, unaware that the world was about to change, and that he would be one of the people to change with it. He did not rehearse for that moment. He did not ask for it. He did not imagine himself standing behind a .50 caliber gun with the ship burning beneath him. He simply met the moment with the whole of who he was, a man shaped by steadiness, responsibility, and a heart that refused to step back. In his final hours aboard the Liscome Bay, the instinct was the same, not dramatic, not cinematic, not born of the attention he received after the medal was pinned to his chest, but born of the same quiet truth. If someone needs help, you help them. If someone cannot rise, you lift them. If someone is alone in the fire, you go to them. You feel the stillness of the water now, and the faint, low memory of the ships that once moved through it. You feel the stories carried by the men who survived, stories whispered across decades, kept alive because some memories refuse to disappear. Courage like Dorie's does not demand celebration. It does not demand monuments. It does not demand that anyone speak loudly in its name. It simply asks that we remember what it looks like when the world is falling apart, and someone chooses to stand steady. You carry that with you now, the weight of his story, the quiet of his final moments, the echo of his instinct to move toward others instead of away. As the waves rise and fall beneath you, as the evening settles over the Pacific, you let that echo stay, not heavy, not painful, but steady, a reminder that courage often comes from the people the world is least prepared to see. And as your breath softens, as the night leans gently around you, a final thought drifts through the quiet. Some heroes are shaped by training, some by rank, some by circumstance, but others, the rarest ones, are shaped by heart alone. Dorie Miller was one of them. You've been part of echoes of war, where stories rise on quiet wings, and the past still circles above us, refusing to land.